Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, presented by Cannonball Books, the kids' fiction imprint of Cannon Press.
Met a ghost of a king on the road when I first fell. Fire burning to my knees I fell. Met a ghost of a king on the road.
Brian's back from camping, everybody.
Yeah, backpacking.
Camping. Did you not camp?
Well, there was camping, but it's important that the camp came out of a backpack.
It just means that you walked.
a long
You just walked
ways.
to the campsite.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eagle Cap Wilderness.
This was your own
Very
birthday
nice.
celebration?
This was actually for my son's 10th, but it happened to be on my birthday as well.
Yeah,
so
this was your birthday
so I
celebration.
co-opted it. It was awesome. He got to, we made him swim in an alpine lake despite his great sadness.
Happy birthday, kid.
He'd get in there. He said, "What if I don't get in?" I said, "I would throw you in."
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. True Confessions with Brian Cole on SASF.
No, he had a great time. So did I.
So today's episode, what, 92?
92.
What are we talking about?
The question is
More proof, bad words? What are we covering?
Actually, it is on proof. It's a follow-up from our proof episode. So the question, let's see. They're really interested in your discussion. So the power of stories and proof connecting with our whole abortion discussion, especially as we appear to have crested a narrative turning point.
Okay.
And so she was wondering if you have scientific evidence, logic, God's law are all strong witnesses. How do you apply what you were saying to the abortion debate in our nation? And it does seem like a big storytelling thing because conservatives have lost that culture war story in a number of other areas.
We walked away from it like morons.
Okay.
So there we go.
So basically, do you think we gave up when we're looking at stuff like, say that take gay marriage or whatever as another one where it feels like it went the other direction? So instead of flipping back toward God's law, we flipped away with Obama. Do you think story and proof has a part to play with that?
So, yeah. But I would say just kind of at the outset, what we got to was like proof is the obligation of belief when somebody leaves morally burdened. And it's really important to not to put our goal is to convince somebody, but we can't put the measure of success on convincing somebody.
Right.
This would mean that Paul was frequently a horrendous failure. When he preaches
as a speaker and a preacher.
Yeah, he preaches the same thing in two places, and in one place there's a revival, and the other he's stoned. It's like that's the outcome does not measure whether or not he's proven something. Like, and the fact is, being stoned is even evidence that he did obligate belief, and people raged, people hated it, people attacked him to try to silence him.
Yeah, you said persuasion's not the goal.
Yep. Well, put it this way. Persuasion is the goal. However, it is not the measure of success.
Yeah. There you go.
And so you're trying to persuade because you love the people in front of you and you want to try to bring them to the truth, but you can't say, I did a bad job because I didn't get them. You're not the Holy Spirit. You don't bring efficacious grace.
Yeah.
You just don't have that ability.
You're not even allowed to turn the heat up until someone flips sometimes.
So you are there trying to obligate belief, but you are not there in any way measuring whether or not you've succeeded by their reaction. Because then you can manipulate, you can lie, you can deceive, you can trick, and so on. You can create hypocrisy. When I made my first splash as a writer, as a whatever, gadfly at the time, I don't know. It was around debunking the Shroud of Turin.
Oh, right.
And when I came up with a theory that actually explained the Shroud of Turin and how it was made, a lot of people attacked me from around the entire world who are believers and said, why does it matter if it's false, if it's actually aiding faith? And that right there is death to the church. The instant the church
say, why does it matter if it's true?
Why, true or false? Why does it matter if it's true or false as long as it instills faith? And that was probably the single most common thing I heard through that whole thing.
Because they saw you doing what they thought was a move of an atheist, tearing down.
Yeah, I had no friends in that one. The atheists didn't like that I said this is an argument over what Jesus was wearing on Easter. this is not this is not a question of whether there was a resurrection. This is a question of whether this is a fraud. This particular relic is a fraud, which it is. But and I'll say it's a fraud because I believe the Bible. The Bible says it's a fraud.
Right. I thought that was a great example because you said John has the fact that the headcloth is separate from the rest of his body. Yep. Shroud of Turin, it's all in one. So that's a great example of proof not being, or truth not being proof. Yep. Everyone could read John.
Many people have been convinced by the shroud. Does God use things like that? Yeah, of course he does. And he has the authority to do so. Mm-hmm. People can convert because they think they're going to get eaten by a bear when there is no bear. It's like God can do all sorts of things and we don't have the authority to go there. So when people overwhelmingly objected from the faith side saying you're damaging faith, you're destroying this bedrock of millions of people's faith, that's really disturbing. And that's why so many people are outside of so many people have the excuses to be outside of the faith because the people inside don't care about truth. They're supposed to be the ones who care about truth, but they care about outcomes. They care about manipulating people into the group. And that's not the goal. So if you look at the nature of proof as obligation of belief, and you look at the three types of proof classically understood by the Greeks, and on down, you have ethos, which is authority, credibility. Then you have pathos, which is basically an emotional resonance, emotional appeal, and then you have logos. What we have in the church as descended from Scots and Germans is an overwhelming emphasis on logos, and to the point of idolatry and to the point of complete failure. And so God gives us 2 or 3 witnesses to obligate belief in our fellow creatures. And we just want to go on one, and we want to pretend like logic can stand alone, and logic is not itself built on faith or built on inductive, the inductive establishment of premises, or built on trusting the authority of others who gave you that premise. You can't really function with logic in a vacuum. It doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Logic, when it's working and in a healthy way, is completely dependent on faith positions, induction, authority, trust. Meaning, do you trust that thing you read? Do you trust the translations of scripture? Do you trust the word of God? Do you trust that scientist who said something because he had this many PhDs, which means you have faith in Harvard? Like, do you have faith? Where do you have faith?
I mean, all logicians agree you can't even jump from specifics. Can't jump from induction to deduction. We already know there's huge divisions.
And yet every single deductive syllogism is built on induction.
Right.
And so in order to establish any premise to be used in a deductive syllogism, induction, meaning basing things on particulars,
specific examples,
trying to get from particulars to a universal principle that's always true, trying to get from a particular truth claim, some dogs have 4 legs, to that universal of all dogs have 4 legs. That's a leap that requires faith. Like it requires.
You're not allowed to say that.
Yeah. So to get to the all dogs have 4 legs statement, you have to have faith, and you're incidentally wrong. Mm-hmm. Some dogs have wheels on the back.
I've seen them.
Yeah. But it's so anyway, the point is that we're given these 3. And so when you speak to a person, when you speak to a real human being who's a narratival creature, who's a character in a story, you come to them with the 3. You come to them knowing they've been given a mind. They've been given the ability to reason. They've also had the law of God written on their hearts. They have a conscience. Yeah. Like there's and that was sensation, feeling. That is something on their pathos. So you're trying to. And
the Bible describes law. The Psalms are full of law as feeling. Like it's a lot of
and
taste.
How you feel about the law too. Taste and see.
Yep.
Love, and so on. So you have the law of God written on their hearts, and it is. They were made in the image of God. They bear the image of God, and there are things that feel wrong. Like they are built that way such that there are things that feel wrong,
and you should not be doing that.
Yeah, and they know that it's that kind of knowledge, and that knowledge is innate. That knowledge is baked into them. God,
it's comic book level with the angel and the devil. Yeah, everyone knows it.
So they have the ability to reason in their mind. They also, as image bearers, are wired to feel certain ways about certain things. And then you get to ethos, credibility, authority, and whether you're speaking with having done your homework, knowing what you're talking about, citing people who agree with you, or the authority, then getting bigger, the authority of Scripture, the authority of God, and to merge all these things, the authority of that law that's written on their heart. So the ethos of the feeling, like the pathos has authority if it's actually baked in there because they are made in the image of God. And the same thing's true of the mind. So the ability to reason, why is this authoritative? Because faith, because they trust the one who gave them the ability to reason. There's faith and there's authority in it. And so you can't ever really just pull one of these out and just have it stand on its own. And whenever we see somebody try to do that, they fail, but also it just is ugly. It's disgusting. So when a dad says to a curious little mind who asks, fill in the blank about Noah's flood, and dad says, because, and they say, but why? And he says, because I'm your dad and I said so. Like, what are you doing? I mean, that's just nonsense. You're living out a pretty horrendously disgusting narrative there as a character, which then will create distaste on the pathos level, will cause your kid to spit this out.
So the tyrant is feeding you the Noah story.
Yeah.
And
so the tyrant can have the truth and be hammering away in a way that makes you feel about it in a completely wrong-headed way. I mean, like you can feel incorrectly because of how somebody is pursuing it.
On the flip side, one of the favorite critiques of Christian kids is like, hey, you're only a Christian because you grew up in a Christian home or went to church.
Yep.
And to that you say amen. Like, I'm a Christian.
And they need to have learned enough to know that's bulverism.
Yeah.
Where they can just be like, that's fallacious.
Insert ad for adorable fallacies.
Yeah, adorable fallacies, and hat tip to C.S. Lewis for naming it.
Yep.
Bulverism is the fallacy when you identify the cause of someone's discovery of a position
instead of rebutting
the position, instead of addressing the position. You say you only say that because you're a girl. You only say that because. If anybody says you only said that because, they're now committing the fallacy of bulverism. And
right.
But you think about this, you say you're only rich because your dad worked hard and left you money. It's like, it's like, okay, sure. Yeah, true. What does that mean about whether or not it's my money? What does that mean about, is this in fact gold that he left me? And so you only have that intellectual position because God, by his grace, placed you in this family that embraced that truth and you were raised in it.
Right.
It's like, okay. I mean, like,
yeah, it's a misunderstanding. I mean, to simplify, but accurately, we're Christians and our kids are Christians because we spanked them and told them what Christianity was.
And there's basically, there are narratival causes.
Yes.
There are narratival causes to every single position.
Definitely.
Because the person holding that position is a character.
And the Holy Spirit uses those narratival means to
You're only a Christian because you felt guilty in a strip club and went and read the Bible. And the guy who converted for exactly that reason, like, yeah. I mean, like, you identify the narratival circumstance. You're only a Christian because you were about to be executed. You're only a Christian because you're in a Flannery O'Connor story and the misfit's about to shoot you in the head. And so you convert. It's like, yes, you're only a Christian because Charlemagne said he was going to execute you if you didn't repent and be baptized. And yeah, right. You're correct. And the cause of somebody's turning to Christ, the narratival cause does not in any way undermine the logos involved after the fact. Like, logos is one of the ways we check our work as narratival creatures after the fact. But every character is moved, and this is the long way around to answering the question we started with. Every character is moved by the narratival causes. They're moved as characters first, and then logic is a way of checking their worksheet, but also of then setting up defenses to try to keep people from moving them again.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, it flips the other way too. We've talked about that a good number of times. When someone deconverts because of something awful that happened to their family, it's seen as
legitimate.
Right. And the question should be, well, does God like the awful thing that happened or not?
Yeah. And as in those conversations, you point out that you're on the side of the hypocrite if you abandon the faith.
Right. He also did not believe.
The hypocrite was attacking the faith. So if an atheist says, well, I'm an atheist because the pastor of my church when I was a teenager was doing a ton of drugs and sleeping with the secretary. We all look at that and say, we understand how that moved you to this position. But when somebody says, I'm a Christian because my dad was magnificent and the pastor was incredibly faithful and humble and served for decades without glory, and I watched him lay his life down repeatedly, and I want to be like him, that's why I'm a Christian. Oh, then we say that's not a good reason. Like people look at that as like that's a flawed reason, as opposed to the negative. My dad was abusive, so I left the faith, is seen as a great reason. Right. And a deft evangelist will tell the person who left the faith, because of that, you've now joined your father's team. Your father hated the faith as well, and he was attacking God's children, and now you are over there on his side. And then to get to the overall discussion around abortion, gay marriage, etc., that's really just a question of how vulnerable evangelicals are to pathos, and the Western world is. So the worst thing an evangelical can ever experience is being told they're being mean. Yeah. I mean, they've just deeply wired. If you're being mean to an unbeliever, if you're being mean to sinners, then you don't really care about them. And that is a lever that moves them rapidly. And so they tried that. They've tried with abortion, and they failed, because ultimately it's really hard to shift the meanness when you're killing a baby. Yeah. That's just a tough shift. But you do see people get moved around rape and incest, and they suddenly forget that,
they're still killing a baby.
You're still killing a baby, and you see them get moved there. Why'd they get moved? It's like, well, because they've been made to feel mean over there. Exactly. If they feel mean, then their logic follows. Their logos, their position, their explicit statement follows. Now, on Obergefell, etc., they felt mean immediately. It's like there's just, you're mean. Love is love. You're mean. Yep. And so you watch people get rolled. So, but the Roe debate has been overwhelmingly a place of stubbornness in evangelical storytelling. Where they've just never lost track of the fact that this is the meanness is going the other direction. I do think that in the power of stories is in pathos. Okay. It leads with pathos in terms of making people taste and see, smell, experience, and feel a position before they've fully assessed a position. Now, conservatives are bad and have walked away from storytelling because they overemphasize logos. They then, when they try to tell a story, all they do is try to spoon feed the logos. They drift into propaganda really, really, really quickly.
What's that October movie?
October Baby?
Yeah, October Baby. I felt
I've never seen it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we can't go there. I enjoyed parts of it. I was enjoying parts of it. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I did feel, man, if you could stay truer to this woman and make me feel that she's real, and don't make me feel like this is a sermon that I suddenly switched into.
So Juno is my favorite piece of pro-life art, and it was written by a stripper who's not pro-life. Yeah. And it's, and it actually captures this moment perfectly, when there's a high school girl who's going to abort her baby, and a protester from her own high school sees her outside a clinic and yells, "Your baby has fingernails." Yeah. And that's the tipping point. Realizing that her baby has fingernails is like, okay, that's all it took. And then you play out the story. You're following the narrative of this girl and her journey and the emotional journey around it in a very interesting way, in a way that makes you realize that Diablo Cody has seen this firsthand, that she's seen this and knows it.
From the writer. Yeah.
From her life. In her life experience, she's seen women go through this in a very authentic way. And, and then a bunch of idiots after Juno came out, incidentally, a bunch of evangelical idiots were upset, talking about how the film, they believed, was increasing teen pregnancies as a result. It's like, no, it's reducing abortions. The teen pregnancies were there. You just now see them because girls were, carrying their baby to term in the wake of that film. Wow. And evangelicals got mad about it. They got mad about the stats. Like, there's more see Hollywood increased teen pregnancy. It's like, oh, you dummies. But But anyway, the point is, we tend to, as conservatives, we tend to try to get into the lesson, the moral, the logic. I'm going to show you the logic of your position. And so conservatives like the books of Ayn Rand, for example, which are trash. And
this is one of my favorite of your rants when you go off on rant.
But conservatives love it. No, but don't you see her point? But don't you see her point? I'm like, I see her puppets.
Yeah.
Like I see her dragging puppets around a Punch and Judy puppet stage and then smashing the bad one. And and even inserting herself as a character in that little Punch and Judy stage to then just beat this one to death. Like it's horrendous. I can't stand her stuff. I really can't. It's not to say that she never did any one chapter correctly. I just really, really abominate those stories. Because they're propaganda. They're propaganda.
Yeah, don't
pieces.
they have full paragraphs of explaining the worldview of each character, and they just pause?
They have wild exposition dumps, and then when she needs a character to be smashed, she makes the character smashed, and she'll have a character make decisions completely out of line with who they are to make her point. I think it was The Fountainhead that I was reading because my wife just, true confessions. This is a happy chocolate chip for this episode. When we got married, I realized that my wife had never read Lord of the Rings. It just hadn't happened. She wasn't opposed. She just never gotten there. She read Russians and Ayn Rand and other things. And I started giving her Woodhouse to read and making her read things that were not depressing. But when I realized she hadn't read Lord of the Rings, I skipped classes for a week in grad school, basically, and just read the entire trilogy out loud to her. And that was it. We took breaks from meals, and I read myself absolutely hoarse and read through all 3 books immediately because it was one of those things where A, these are great, and B, they need to be heard. Like these books need to be heard. David Radford of the Grey Havens of our fantastic bumper music and I were texting about this.
Yep, goes to the king for all of you who've asked me over and over. He was saying that he doesn't mind Rings of Power as a completely different show. Like if it was just a show that had nothing to do with Tolkien, he'd be like, this is kind of, I don't mind hanging out in this world. But as a Tolkien show, really, really bothers him. But he also said he'd really objected to something I'd said in an earlier podcast about the Lord of the Rings movies versus the books, because he came to the stories through the movies first and thought that, anyway, he thought I was wrong. And then he went and read the books. Well, remember, people can be converted because of the bear that's not real.
Yeah.
It's a similar way. People can come to Tolkien through the movies.
Exactly. So he went and he read them, but then he since listened to the audiobooks and he said that he thinks that is really the way to consume Lord of the Rings is to have heard it. And I really agree with that. It's written to the ear. It's structured that way. I grew up listening to them read. And
we're in the middle, it's 9 down to 1.
Yeah.
And you can get little kids to pay attention to these when they're far from reading it.
Yep. And, anyway, consuming it via reading aloud is really, really fantastic. So I did that in grad school. I was like, okay, I remember going to 1 or 2 classes that week. In courses I really felt that I needed to, but I blew off all these classes and just read. By the end of the week, like my wife was all in, like, okay, this is amazing. I was doing voices. I did the whole thing. We should have recorded it. But it was deep commitment. I was like, no, you need to actually hear these. Not just read these while I'm gone, read these while I'm at class. It's like, you must hear them. And the thing is, when you have, and as part of that, she wanted me to read Fountainhead on the other side. And
it came with a counterweight.
Yeah. I think, that was a few months later, because we read Lord of the Rings in Maryland where I was in grad school. And then Fountainhead was happening back in Idaho, probably 9 months later. And I remember getting really close to the end of this massive monstrosity and just literally throwing the book. And it's I've tossed books down. I have discarded books. This time I hurled the book like I wanted the whole thing to come undone. Because it already had. But anyway, the point is, conservatives who want to make a point I can't tell you how many times I've had people pitch me or say they have an idea for a TV show, a novel, or a film, and then they say the message. They don't actually have an idea for a story. They don't watch people as characters in stories. They have little morals and bumper stickers and things that they want. To be wrapped in chocolate.
You
and
know
given
how
to the
children are
masses.
supposed to obey their parents.
Yep.
That's my children's book.
I'm
idea.
doing a book about how kids need to obey their parents. It's like, no, that's not, no, sorry. It's not how this works.
Yep.
And so I think that as conservatives have over obsessed about logos as if it stands on its own, and they've lost its relationship to ethos and pathos. They've just, their art has wildly suffered. Everything's suffered over there.
Okay, so here's the thing. Do you think October Baby is more about the people who are already convinced? It's reminding us why it matters. So it's not like an evangelistic piece or not a piece of art. It's more of like a team sponsorship.
I think that can happen for sure in the faith market. I actually, like I said, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah.
But that tells you something where it's like, it didn't interest me.
You didn't feel the need to watch it?
It didn't interest me at all.
I don't remember hating it. I don't remember hating it.
I've heard people talk about how it's a good movie. I've not, so I'm not attacking it. I actually just genuinely didn't. Oh, it's about this girl who in her journey. It's like I'm convinced. I look at that and I think it's going to try to convince me of something I already believe, and I'm not.
Right.
I don't have those. I don't have those available 90 minutes.
It made me wonder if conservatives did not do that for Obergefell. Like we let ourselves forget why marriage matters. And if we needed more of those pieces saying, hey, no, you've already lost heterosexual marriage. So that's why we're losing homosexual marriage. But maybe that's not the tool of. Yeah,
I don't even know. The problem is when you try to get out there and wage war with fiction, I think you're losing track again of the nature of it at all. Conservatives get out there and you're losing track of this is food. Mm-hmm. I want to try to cook up a dinner that convinces everyone of something. And it's like, so, okay. Like, what do you mean? Like, how does that even work? And then we can all realize that does work. Like if I have people into my home and I make them fantastic meat and the kids all sit down around the table and everyone's joyful and the communion, the breaking of bread that we all share together is really pleasant. The aroma is attractive and they want more of this. And what's the foundation that this is built on? Now that can happen. That can happen naturally and organically if we just try to have a good dinner. Like people will show up as narratival characters and they be welcomed into your home and they have this experience and it can move them because they're narratival creatures. They move for narratival reasons as opposed to for logical reasons. Like realize that they move like paper clips move to magnets. They get drawn towards death out of a love for death, or they get drawn towards the light because the light is so refreshing and beautiful. And the idea of being forgiven and unburdened of all these things is magnificent. And then they'll start building logical structures to justify what they're doing. So when I write a novel or when I try to write a film, I am overwhelmingly trying to focus on the same way I'm trying to focus on a massive pile of tri-tip roasts that I'm doing on the grill. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm doing it that way. I'm looking at flavor. I'm looking at aroma. I'm looking for the whole meal of it. And knowing that the meal will affect people, but I'm not losing track of the meal of it to try to get to the effect. So if you were having somebody over, and I grew up many an atheist at our table. I've broken bread with, guys all over the map, from Christopher Hitchens on down to guys who are professional, like touring atheist debaters, So Andrew Sullivan and Christopher Hitchens and all these guys were at our dining room table at different phases, my parents' table. If we had said, let's make the honey butter so that it really convinces them, let's make sure we put the logic on top of the honey butter. It's like, you're just going to fail. Like, and your heart's not in it. You're trying to manipulate. You're doing it's a weird thing. But if you actually are crafting the food, the rolls, the honey butter, the meat, the potatoes, all the things, you're crafting them because they are beautiful. And these things that are beautiful honor God in their beauty. That laces them. It really does infuse them with authority. And it really does make the characters who receive them feel.
Yeah.
And it makes them feel in a certain way. But if you do it for that reason, then it immediately gets shallower. It gets more shallow and it kind of starts to fade. If you are there really directly living in the presence of God, trying to create something beautiful that you're going to give to his image bearers, and you're going to give it to them because like you're honoring God through doing so. And there's a degree to which they can walk out that door and hate you and you don't mind because you made the best cheesy potatoes you possibly could have made. That's how I want to pursue fiction.
Right. The cheesy potatoes would be a counterbalance to that argument of like, no, I don't hate you.
Yeah.
Didn't you eat the cheesy potatoes?
I gave you my best cheesy potatoes. These are literally my best cheesy potatoes. So when I'm writing stories, that's really what I'm doing. The food image, the food metaphor that we use here on the podcast is not accidental. And when conservative Christians get hung up on wanting their art to be a logical argument, when they get hung up on that, that's like obsessing over the caloric breakdown of a meal. It's like obsessing over whether the food pyramid is being honored in what you put on the table. And that's just not what we're supposed to be doing in that moment. In that moment as characters, that's not how we're supposed to behave. So when I'm sending Ashtown burials out into the world, cupboards, these shows I'm working on, or even ninja cartoons, I'm really trying to make cookies. I'm trying to make after school cookies, the best ones that I can make and put them out there in the world. And I can because I think that I've got the bedrock of truth, goodness, and beauty because of the way God made the world. But I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah.
Like that's not what this is. I'm just trying to feed them, just trying to give them food. And as conservatives abandon that, they just drift into, but how do we accomplish our political goals with our art? And it's like, just, you know what? Just focus on honoring God with your art and let him use it.
That's good.
So that's the ethos, pathos, logos of it all means that when you've done a really great job, you have to know that there are times when I've eaten cheesy potatoes and I am obligated to believe. Like there's an obligation of belief comes to narrative creatures through narrative means.
Totally.
And then when you assess it, like, the logic sound, there's an authority to this, then this is resonating with my architecture as an image bearer. Like this is plucking the strings in my heart in a harmony. Yeah. And I can't help but hear it.
Yep.
And that's
my grandma Murdy's contribution. It's cheesy potatoes.
Cheesy potatoes and amazing cinnamon pull-aparts.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah, which we actually ate, I don't even know how many of those cinnamon pull-aparts that she'd give us every year.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Brian's grandmother provided the world with some great cinnamon pull-aparts around Christmas time every year.
Yep, every year.
Pretty fantastic.
Yep.
And that honestly is a lot more effective than having written, an adorable fallacies book, frankly.
Right. That's great. That's great. As we're looking forward, then communities in the post-Roe overturn, I think we'd say, hey, you need to be doing what good Christians should do. Yeah. Again, don't be asking, how do I flip the national conversation unless, you're part of, I don't know.
Unless you're in the Senate or the White House.
Right. Yeah. Instead, it's, are you making the cheesy potatoes?
Yep.
Are you eating
how many people have eaten the world's best cinnamon pull-apart as made by you?
I know. Right.
And it's, what is it and why? Are you doing it as a trick? Or are you doing it because you actually have access to something truly beautiful that you can do and that you can then give and share, which is itself a narratival reflection of the gospel and grace and all these other pieces. So it's and really realize that you never really get to see, when you live like this, you never get to see the fruit of what you've done. I mean, there's times, sure, you can. But when I look back at my own familial history of like these huge moments that turned the history of my own family, the people who were responsible for them, just never knew, frequently never knew. So
you mean
elementary school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Nebraska.
Oh, right.
Like the care she showed to my grandfather when he was behind because of illness and had fallen behind an extra year, and that she just focused on him and got him caught all the way up. Like when she had one room schoolhouse and she was like 18 years old. Yeah. And then because of that, he ends up in the Navy. Because he ends up in the Navy, he marries my grandmother. Like it's all these things that just happen. And I exist and my father exists and all the things, downstream because one person is doing a thing that they don't really think matters. Now, does she need to look at that fat-faced kid in her one-room schoolhouse in Nebraska and say, man, I better get on it? Because if I don't get on it, this kid's never going to meet, Bessie Dodds in Japan and is never going to have Douglas Wilson as a son. And so there will be no ACCS and there will be no, classical Christian education revival in North America.
Podcast.
There will be no Stories or Soul Food podcast. And the world just could not tolerate such an absence.
Those 92 episodes would not exist.
92 episodes would not happen. Like, that's not what she's doing. Like, that's not how she acts, but that's the fruit her actions have. And so we always have to live as if God could take this into wild cultural movements. Your care for a third grader in a classroom, your care for that kid motivated rightly can have culture swinging consequences that you don't get to see.
Yeah.
It's like tell way down the line, but giving that kid a cookie, baking the world's best cookies or the world's best cinnamon pull-aparts because I'm a Christian woman, damn it.
See previous episode.
Like this is my mission.
Yeah.
And I take my mission seriously. That can change the world because we live in a story. And those are the touches that change the world. We're writing big syllogisms. Have they changed anybody? I mean,
a few people.
They've rotted some things out. I mean, they can be really destructive, but not really. I mean, Tolkien took Lewis up on a hilltop when the wind was just right in the beech trees and the moon was there and all the pathos was aligned. Like the pathos was perfectly perfect.
Their persuasive moment? I don't know that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when Tolkien took Lewis up on the hill and famously told him, like, this is a myth, yes, but it's a myth that's true.
Oh, okay.
It's like, it wasn't an argument. It wasn't logic. They were on an evening walk and it was everything lined up. And when he did that, it was like he plucked the strings in Lewis's heart in a way that Lewis heard the harmony and his anger evaporated and his hatred of it evaporated. And then everything C.S. Lewis did and touched and impacted, cascaded down from there through culture and through the entire world because of his friend Toller's taking him up onto a hill at the right moment and just saying something. He didn't roll out syllogisms. It just all resonated in that, in that moment. So, and how much has, Tumnus affected the world? One little figment of Lewis's imagination and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and Aslan, he's made up a lion. And then that like the impact of that imagination, of that meal that he made for everybody has been incredible. So be motivated by the beauty, by the truth, goodness, and beauty of the scene in front of you as a character. Be motivated by executing that. And don't worry about, kicking over the walls of Babylon so much. They'll go down. Like they're going to go down.
Yeah. Plus worship, I think, is described that way.
Right?
Like, yeah. Yep. You're doing that part on Sunday morning.
And are you getting, and again, see the scene. So if we back up and Sunday morning is your house is full of crackle and snapping and you're barking at your girls
because you're late.
Like, come on. Snap. Like, well, you're already failing as characters.
Yeah.
Like as you go to worship God, you've already undercut the entire act by doing it that way. So it's here, I'm mad at you because you took my shoes without asking and you're being slow. And I told you not to do your hair that way. And all this stuff. Get in the car. We're like, get in the car. And you're undermining the whole thing. You're showing up with a sour spirit. You're showing up as a hypocrite. You're showing up having already contradicted the entire act. So, I mean, this all comes back to stories because that's what this podcast is. Be a character living faithful moments in your story. Truth, goodness, and beauty in front of you right now in the next 2 minutes, the next 3 minutes, the next 5 minutes. And know that will change the world. I mean, that it does, because the world is a story and that's how characters move things.
Yeah. God doesn't miss any threads.
No, ever. There's no just hanging chads anywhere. And you can be in a one-room schoolhouse in Nebraska and have no vision of anything other than this kid needs my help.
Yeah.
And that's it. That person looks like they need a sandwich. Like this,
right.
a really good one. That's how we're supposed to function. That is ultimately what ends up obligating belief and moving nations and peoples more than any distilled reason. So there we go. Episode 92 in the books.
It's a wrap.
And then later on, I'm sure we'll have to talk more about bad words since I cussed.
There will be questions. Also, we left him hanging on the Shroud of Turin, so we'll also come back to
Didn't
that.
we do an episode about the Shroud?
I don't think so. Did we?
Oh. Well, so I just rattled one of the skeletons in my closet.
I know.
I just moved on.
I think so, yeah.
There it goes.
You didn't even answer it. And I thought, I'm just going to let this hang, and they'll watch the whole episode and still be disappointed.
It's not even my only skeleton.
No.
There's other skeletons in there too. But just know this, the Shroud is fake.
A menagerie of skeletons.
The Shroud is fake, and I know how to do it. There we go. We'll leave it on that.
That's good. Hey, it's Brian Cole, your favorite co-host of the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, and you won't be able to see what I'm holding in my hands here, but it is an advanced copy of Sir Bat-a-Lot and the Cranky Danky Dragon, written by Rachel Jankovic and illustrated by Forrest Dickinson, and published by Cannonball Books. Both of them have been on the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, so I feel like our podcast can take credit for this book, right? You won't be able to see the beautiful illustrations reminiscent of Miyazaki and Bill Peet, but I can read you a couple snippets that'll help you understand why Sir Bat-a-Lot should be a feature of your home. In the land of somewhere normal was a town called Boring Plain, and a tiny magic kingdom no one knew by any name. But it wasn't always quiet there, not like you might have thought, because the boy who built the walls was called Sir Bat-a-Lot. You'll notice I skipped a page, but that's because I wanted to get to Sir Bat-a-Lot. There's also a dragon who drinks a bitter brew brewed of boys whining, and that's pretty awesome. I also ruined the line of poetry there. So just imagine it being so much better. Here, I'll flip the pages and crinkle the hardback so you can hear it. You hear that? Oh, crinkle, crinkle of the brand new hardback. Anyways, it's available for pre-order at canonpress.com. Comes signed and comes with a print from Forrest Dickinson, also signed. So go check it out now for Christmas and the rest of your life. It's passed my kid's test, and I know that next time we have a whining incident, I'll have to bring up the Cranky Danky Dragon with his heart of hard to please. Until next time.